If you're familiar with psychical research, you'll already be aware of such famous mediums as Daniel Douglas Hume, the Scottish-American medium, a darling of Europe's aristocracy. Then there's Helen Duncan, the British medium, accused of giving away wartime secrets through her mediumship, and she was tried in London in 1944 under the 1735 Witchcraft Act. Also there's Mina Crandon of Boston, better known as Marjorie, who had a controversial bust-up with sceptical Harry Houdini, the escapologist. From South America there's Carlos Mirabelli, one of Brazil's most remarkable mediums, but by no means the only one. From Europe, you probably know of Eusapia Palladino from Naples, who confused investigators as to whether she was genuine or a fraud. And let's not forget Leonora Piper, the American mental medium, so impressive that Professor William James of Harvard called her his one white crow for being a rare yet truly genuine medium. He declared only one white crow is needed to prove that all crows are not black. Well, I've made several documentaries recognising the contributions of these people, but not even one such celebrity features in this programme on forgotten mediums, of which you're watching part 1 of 2. There's no doubt that the most impressive mediums seem to come from way back. Having spent decades studying what he calls the heyday of historic spiritualism, which he dates from 1848 to 1958, the author, Riley Hagerty, has brought together a collection of forgotten evidence from excellent, yet lesser-known mediums. They feature in his books such as Spectral Evidence, Volumes 1 and Volume 2. Some sitters who witnessed these mediums wrote first-hand reports about their phenomena, and Hagerty has searched these out to reprint chunks of them. 31 of Hagerty's chapters assess little-known mediums such as Bertie Lily Candler, George Spriggs and Molly Perriman. But also there are better-known cases: George Valentine, the Eddy brothers, Davenport brothers and Ethel Post Parrish. Since it's not my job to summarise all of Hagerty's work, I'm simply pointing you in the right direction if you might want to read about them. But here's one example of what you might find between these covers. Take John Remmers, who began investigating survival following the tragic death of his young son John. After the family had tried but failed to contact him through their own psychical experiments at home, John Remmers was invited to a sitting with a Mrs. Presnell, a little-known direct voice medium. This provided a breakthrough for Remmers, since one of the voices coming through the megaphone addressed him directly. "John," it said. "Yes," he replied. "Your mother," it exclaimed, a voice he could never possibly forget. And to prove her identity, she mentioned intimate family details never previously shared with anyone. Later, another voice addressed him in German, the voice of his grandmother. He writes, "I asked her if she remembered the song she sang when I was a boy and we sat in our garden on summer evenings." Without the least hesitation and in a clear, strong, characteristic voice, she sang in German 2 verses from that song. "I had not mentioned its name," he writes, "nor given any clue about this at the séance, and 25 years had elapsed since I last heard it." Well, I'd say Remmers, a total stranger to the medium, had hit the jackpot the very first time he attended a sitting, and that's lucky for some. But here was all the encouragement that he needed. Indeed, his sister Bertha and his wife's sister also appeared at this first séance, which lasted 2.5 hours. Mrs. Presnell was clearly a star performer, but there's no information about her from other sources. Remmers' book, The Great Reality, a free copy of which can be found at survivalebooks.org, reports that over the years he moved his family home several times, living in Cincinnati, in Dayton, Ohio, and San Diego, California. Well, I expected to find photographs of them, including his wife Emily and other young son, Bert, but I found none. Subsequently, the whole family developed clairvoyance and mediumship skills of their own. Take Bert, just 7.5 years old, when he produced this automatic writing. Quote, "I come to your home often. I lived in a cabin in the wood. I have changed my mind about some things. I'm interested in this boy. In his later years, he will be recognized as an authority in agriculture." This message was signed Thoreau, meaning Henry David Thoreau, the American naturalist, essayist, poet and philosopher who died in 1862, having spent much of his time reflecting on living simply in natural surroundings. He was someone Bert would not have known about at his young age, and Thoreau's prediction was fulfilled. As an adult, Bert became an agricultural consultant in California. But in terms of the family's mediumship, Bert's father is the one of prime interest, writing several books on spiritual evidence, including Is Death the End, published in 1928, and The Great Reality in 1947. In these, he describes his own clairvoyant development, contacting people's family members on the other side. He concludes, "I laugh aloud at our mentally limited critics who cry, 'It's all hallucination.'" Well, his books also describe the physical phenomena of other forgotten mediums, not least a Mrs. Susan Bartlett, through whom 7 of Remmers' relatives manifested, including his son, who was heard with a hesitant, anxious beginning. The conversation held between the Remmers and their dead son provides an insight into what spirits seem able to perceive about people on Earth. Take this test conducted by his mother, Emily. "John," she asked, "can you tell me about a certain thing Papa is wearing?" "Do you mean that pin?" he replied. "It's made from a piece of wood I picked up in the petrified forest on a trip to Florida." "In Florida?" his mother inquired. "I meant to say California. I gave it to Aunt Bibby at the time. She had a pin made of it for Papa. She sent it yesterday, and he got it today." Don't ask me to explain how this process works. It was amazing that all the lad's statements were correct, except the initial slip, saying Florida instead of California, which he himself recognized. Later, John Remmers hit the jackpot again when his spiritualist friend recommended a materialization medium living in Kentucky, a Mrs. Langley. Driving to that state ensured they were unknown on arrival. His wife Emily had agreed that Helen, an orphan child living with the family, should go to this séance in her place. Once the sitters were assembled, the cabinet curtains hiding the medium parted, and a little materialized girl walked out, aged about 10, and clothed in white. She was recognized at once by the regulars as she glided about the circle, chatting with them, and then, stopping in front of John Remmers, she said, "How do you do, Mr. Remmers?" even though she had not been given his name. Finally, she asked the group to watch her dematerialize and vanish out of sight, which she did. After several manifestations for other sitters, a feminine voice called for Helen, the orphan living with Mr. Remmers, asking her to go up to the cabinet to meet a materialized form. This was Katie, her mother, who spoke endearingly. And then, turning to John Remmers, she thanked him and Emily for taking Helen into their family and providing this chance for Helen to learn about spirit. She even laughed at John, saying, "Thought you could fool us, didn't you, bringing Helen here in Emily's place?" Well, Helen's father then materialized just as unexpectedly as her mother had done, after which John Remmers' own mother and sister materialized. This altogether astounding event was repeated even more sensationally when Emily came with John for another second séance with Mrs. Langley, because on this occasion their dead son John materialized for the first time. Remmers reported that he was jovial, unmistakably recognizable with his blonde hair, and characteristically rapid in his speech, displaying what Remmers had called a radiance not of this earth. Well, I know it's difficult for those unfamiliar with materialization to grasp the amazing fact of its reality, Remmers remarked. But it's true nevertheless, which echoes the famous psychical researcher Professor Charles Richet in Paris, who said of materialization, "I never said it was possible, I only said it was true." As it happens, when John Remmers lived in San Diego, California, he became acquainted with Hamlin Garland, the Pulitzer Prize-winning author of 52 books, mostly novels. My documentary about this man, entitled Rejecting the Afterlife, describes Garland's lifetime devotion to attending seances with mediums now forgotten, who demonstrated the most remarkable psychical phenomena anybody could wish for. And yet, despite this, he still rejected the survival hypothesis, which by the end of the video, in my view, made him look a bit ridiculous. How could such powerful evidence be so glibly rejected? To find out more, you can watch my video. One aspect of Garland's life that I omitted from that documentary was his final book, written when he was in his 70s, entitled The Mystery of the Buried Crosses. It was published in 1939. Arguably, it's one of the most intriguing evidential cases in psychical research, but it was difficult to include in that documentary owing to its sheer length and complexity. In this, Garland called for the assistance of Mrs. Sophia Williams, a non-professional medium who provided him with great service. Apart from knowing that she came from Chicago, we're ignorant of her personal life, when she was born or how long she lived, but we do have a few photographs of her. In 1946, she wrote a book, You Are Psychic. Speaking of her own development, she wrote, "For 4 years I sat quietly each day, learning the art of relaxation and complete detachment, with her development advancing through information given in raps, automatic writing, clairvoyance and clairaudience." She adds, "At times when my family and friends took part in sittings, partial materializations also appeared, which was a great achievement." She also reported some of her voices spoke in different languages. Her relationship with Hamlin Garland goes as follows. In 1934, shortly after giving a talk on psychic phenomena in Los Angeles, Garland received a letter from a Californian gentleman named Gregory Parent. This told a strange tale connected with his psychic wife, Violet. Together, they had been involved in finding around 1,500 small crosses hidden and buried by local Aztec Indian tribes living in California centuries before. Now they were unearthed again at the direction of Violet's spirit guides, whose messages and solid discoveries provided empirical evidence of the continuity of life on the other side. The crosses varied from 2 to 12 inches in length, appearing to be of pagan origin, and 40 or more had double crossbars reputed to have been used to pray for rain. The parents claimed they travelled 3,000 miles around California over a 9-year period for this work, and not just crosses were found, also gold and silver coins, paper currency and other treasures, some found in containers such as tin cans and rotted pocketbooks. Such a quantity was found, sufficient to buy the parents a house and provide living expenses. And following his death, Gregory Parent also bequeathed Garland 7 cases containing all 1,500 crosses, which apparently had little monetary value, together with examples of spirit photography taken by Violet, plus 22 notebooks detailing their work. Although the Indians had buried these crosses during California's early missionary period, some appeared to have originated from pre-Christian times in the early 16th century and from Yucatan and Guatemala down south. And Gregory claimed there were still more crosses to be found, but Violet's death had put an end to their search. So he suggested Garland might want to follow this up himself. In response, Garland gave little attention to Gregory Parent's original letter, being otherwise busy. But 2 years later, he decided to find a medium in order to contact Violet Parent, who had died in 1929, and whose help he wanted to find more artifacts. Around July 1937, Garland found the right person in Sophia Williams, a modest amateur medium making no charge for her services. She was a direct voice medium, his friend reported, which is to say voices materialized not through her mouth but independently of her in the air close by. One testimonial about her authenticity came from Dr. Leon Poundstone, a dentist. He described how one day he had placed a filling in one of Sophia's teeth, and while holding the filling in place to allow the material to set, the dentist's dead wife began talking to him from thin air. He reported, and I quote, "Her voice came very distinctly while Mrs. Williams' mouth was wide open, her throat full of saliva, and I had one hand in her mouth holding the matrix." Garland described Sophia as young, attractive, and seemingly normal in mind and body. During his initial tests with her, she used her psychometric abilities to accurately describe the historical background of a cross that Garland handed to her, which had already been shown to experts. She claimed it came from Mexico or beyond, that it was found in California and had something to do with sun worship and cannibalism. Later, Garland's Uncle David, dead for 30-odd years, also spoke through Mrs. Williams, asking Garland if he remembered an old tune he used to play on his fiddle. Garland then heard the tune itself, entitled "When You and I Were Young, Maggie," which goes like this. The version of this song that Garland heard was being whistled and played on a violin, even though there was no such instrument in the house. For all practical purposes, this indicated it really was Uncle David, even though the medium could not possibly have known about him and his ability to play the fiddle, nor could she have smuggled a musical instrument into and out of Garland's home without his knowing. His brother-in-law, who had died the previous October, also identified himself by name as Laredo, which was correct. Laredo Taft was a famous sculptor who produced magnificent, huge civic statues in states all over America, like these. Further evidence came through a voice directed towards Garland's stenographer, helping Garland make a record of these sittings. His name was Gaylord Beeman. "Gay, this is Harry," the voice said, giving his last name, Friedlander. The astonished Beeman explained that this friend had been killed in a plane crash in San Francisco Bay, and the voice provided details about that crash. Many other convincing voices came through Sophia Williams, including the deceased Violet parent herself, who made contact regarding the buried crosses, accompanied by an 18th century missionary, Father Unipo Serra, who knew all about them. When alive on Earth, he founded 9 of the 21 Spanish Catholic missions from San Diego up to San Francisco, in what was then Spanish-occupied territory. And incidentally, in 1988 the Pope declared Serra a saint. Serra claimed the crosses were originally buried in ceremonies to appease the gods. So this is how Garland and Williams came to travel hundreds of miles through California and Mexico, searching for artifacts. Through Sophia's direct voice, the spirits told them where to go, where to halt, in which direction to walk, and where to stop to dig them up. Some were hidden in deep gullies, others far from the highway in cactus scrubland high in the hills. In total they found 16 crosses, similar to the parents' collection, in 10 widely separated locations. Essential to this was Sophia's rare ability of requiring neither darkness nor red light for her phenomena, only a trumpet to amplify the voices. As a consequence, they could receive messages as they travelled around in their car. A year after Garland published The Mystery of the Buried Crosses, He died in 1940. Having rejected the possibility of an afterlife for his entire life, some folk thought that this final expedition for the buried crosses caused him to change his mind about life after death. But this has been challenged by members of his own family. So I guess if there is an afterlife, he only discovered it on arriving there. In her 1946 book, Williams wrote that she became interested in psychic phenomena after seeing demonstrations of various kinds and then reading up on the subject. Then she wondered if she could develop psychic abilities herself. Her book stresses the need for absolute relaxation. Quote, "Conscious thought must be avoided," she asserted, "and consciously trying not to think is thinking." She added, "The moment one begins to analyse the process, it stops, so an open mind is absolutely necessary." As Williams came to understand direct voice mediumship, the spirits used ectoplasm to mould an artificial voice box to make sounds, a view shared by mediums elsewhere in the world. It took her 4 years to achieve intelligible direct voice phenomena, initially so squeaky, so strange, that she and her sitters would look about to see if the sound was coming from the heating radiators or loose floorboards. Only as she began using a trumpet did the voices become clearer. Quote, "I'm certain that much of the information I receive comes through personalities existing in another dimension who function at a higher rate of frequency," she said. "It's apparent that when they pass into the next dimension, they carry with them all their habits, faults and ideas which they retain until they learn to progress." Finally, you may want to know where you can view these crosses. The University of Southern California holds a few in its Hamlin Garland collection, and other museums were offered some, but refused to accept them. In 2011, Lisette Coley, now president of the Parapsychology Foundation in New York, discovered 27 of the 1,500 in a box in her basement, sent to her mother, the medium Eileen Garrett, in 1966 by the son of Garland's publisher. But the vast majority of these crosses have just disappeared, possibly thrown away. So that's it for now. I've reached the end of Forgotten Mediums Part 1, and I hope you'll want to proceed to watch Part 2 in due course. Amongst other things, it tells you about the greatest ever medium to live in Australia. Thanks for listening.